Hello, students. Good morning. Good afternoon. I hope everyone is having a great day and had a great weekend. Today, we are going to learn a new topic and we will talk about regions of the United States. And we'll also discuss, is Florida part of the South? Because we know it is geographically, but we'll talk about some reasons why it sometimes is not considered part of the South. So, our Florida State Standard today is to describe current major cultural regions of North America. And you can see some stereotypes of each state. And these are actually surveyed stereotypes where they surveyed 1,000 Americans and asked them their stereotype or what they think of each state. And these are the most common answers. So, for example, Texas has a lot of cowboys. New York has a lot of rude people. Um, California is very liberal. Idaho has a lot of potatoes. So these are just like the things people think about when they think about different regions of the United States. And some of these stereotypes, are obviously are not true, but it's still what people think. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's kind of interesting. So, let's talk about the different regions of the country and the United States. The first region is the Northeast that we'll talk about today. And the Northeast, as you remember, a lot of these states were really important in the early part of America's history, where some of the first original 13 colonies are located. So, for example, Delaware was the first state, DE, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So these states are all considered part of the Northeast, and they're all located in this part of the country. Okay, so the Northeast, um, climate-wise, is very different than where we live in Florida. So in this summer, it could get really hot, like it is down here, but in the winter, it could get really cold. And they have four distinct seasons. Right now, it's still considered spring in New York. So sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's hot, but it's somewhere in the middle most of the time. And yeah, you can see what some of the land in the Northeast would look like. There's lots of woods. There's lots of pine trees. You don't really see so many pine trees down here in Florida, but that kind of tree is located in the Northeast throughout. Okay, the Southeast region. The Southeast region um, is considered this area of the US. And I'm going to go through all the states real quick: Maryland, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana. They're all considered part of the Southeast, and that includes Florida, our home state. But there's many states in the Southeast region. Some of these states, like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, are some of the original 13 colonies, Virginia as well. Florida is not an original state or a colony of the United States. Remember, it used to be a Spanish territory, and Florida is unique in many different ways, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so you can see some different parts of the Southeast, like the Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina and Tennessee. Very beautiful. Also, we have the Everglades in Florida. Remember, the Everglades is part of a national park, and it's really a slow moving river. We talked about that before in one of our past lessons. Very interesting. All right, so the Midwest. Something interesting about the Midwest is it's not exactly located in the western half of the United States, at least most of it. Here are some states considered part of the Midwest. When I think of Midwest, I think of like Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, but it's actually in the eastern part of the US, right? So South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. All these states are part of what's called the Midwest. So the Midwest has its own special kind of culture. It's usually really cold in the Midwest, especially like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan could get really cold as well. Um, but they also have their own kind of accent. The way they talk in the Midwest, just like the way they talk in the Northeast, is very different than the way they talk in the Southeast than the way they talk in the Midwest. So they all get like their own kind of culture, and the way they say things um, is very different. So everyone has their own accent depending on where they're from. So the Midwestern accent is pretty cool. I like listening to it, and the people there are usually very nice, very friendly. Moving on. Here are some parts of the Midwest: beautiful mountains, tall grass prairie in Kansas. Looks amazing. Looks beautiful. Okay, Southwest region. There's only 4 states considered the Southwest: Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma. And they have their own culture, their own style. They wear cowboy hats. That's the stereotype. Not everyone there wears cowboy hats, but they yeah, the Southwest definitely has its own kind of special climate, special culture. People there maybe have a talk with a different kind of accent than in the southeast, where they do have a southern accent, but it's a different kind of southern accent. And every state has their own culture, and every region has their own culture and the way of doing things. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but I just want to go over the regions today. Um, so like the White Sands in New Mexico is a lot of desert, and that's what the Southwest is consisting of, is a lot of desert. Also the floor of the Grand Canyon in Arizona, beautiful. Remember, you can see rocks that are billions of years old. Um, yeah, it's like looking back in time. Very, very nice. Okay, the West. So these are the states that are considered the West, okay? Washington, Oregon, California, they're the most western states because they border the Pacific Ocean and they're the farthest west. Hawaii, oh, actually, Hawaii is even more west in Alaska, but I'm talking about just the mainland states before. So Hawaii is an island. Alaska is actually connected to Canada. It's our biggest state, but it's not part of the mainland. Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado. These states are all considered part of the West. And the West has its own culture as well. And different parts of the West have different cultures and different ways of people behaving, and customs, and the weather is different in the West as well. California has beautiful weather, especially Southern California. It's different than Florida. It's not as humid. It's not really as hot, but I heard it's really nice in Southern California weather-wise. Okay, here are some pictures of the West. Very beautiful. Remember we talked about bears? So if you don't remember anything from my class, you can remember this potentially life-saving advice. Um, so a brown bear, they are very aggressive usually. So what you want to do if you see one is play dead. Okay? So brown, lay down. You can remember it like that. If you see a black bear, you want to make as much noise as possible and try to scare them off. So black, fight back. That's a good way to remember what you do if you see a black bear. Maybe you can scare them away, or, you know, get really lucky. If you see a polar bear, the old expression is say your prayers, because polar bears are very nasty and there's really no chance if you do see a polar bear. But yeah, you might see polar bears up in the Arctic, but not in the West. And here's a map of the United States, and I want to talk about in more detail some of the different regions of the United States and their cultures. But today I was just introducing you the states of each region, and yeah, you can see like in the. All right, let me move on because I don't want to run out of time. Okay, so here you see the different regions in different colors. Some people give Texas its own region. Some people say it's part of the Southwest. Florida is its own special state. You see, it's a different color than the rest of the South, and we'll talk about that in a second. Sometimes instead of the Northeast, you have the Mid-Atlantic and New England, so you can split up the Northeast into 2 different regions as well. Um, yeah, so California can be considered its own region as well. I want to talk to you about Florida because it's really interesting. Is Florida part of the South? So there is actually part of the state's panhandle that are as close to Mexico. I'm sorry, not Mexico. There's parts of the state's panhandle that are close to Chicago as they are to the southern tip of the state, which is pretty incredible. Yeah, Florida is a huge state. Driving from one end to the other could take a really long time. In 1930, Florida was actually 31st among states in population. As we know now, it's actually third. But in 1930, it was 31st. It was the smallest state in the South by far. And it had a lower population than Alabama, Kentucky, and even Mississippi. So, what happened? Well, in World War II, we built a lot of military bases there, and that brought a lot of people with those bases, and there was a population boom. A lot of people who are not from Florida moved to Florida, so they brought their cultures with them, and that's why Florida is such a unique sort of culture because you get a lot of people from the Northeast, but all over the country, and it's different than the rest of the South, right? So what makes the South Southern? Southern culture has been and remains generally socially conservative than the rest of the country. Um, so in the South, like going to church and being very conservative politically is common. Florida is a little bit different than that, but um, there's many conservative people in Florida as well. So, from its many cultural influences, the South developed its own unique customs, literature, cuisine, that means food, and music. So, a lot of people in the South, they like country music or other kinds of music that's just popular in the South. People in the South have Southern accents for the most part. And also, I've found that a lot of people in the South, and other people would agree, are very friendly. They're very like hospitable. So this meme is kind of making fun of how nice people in the South are, because it's true, and I've found that because I've been to the South, and even though I'm from New York, I've been to the South because my mom is from Virginia. And then, should Florida have a breakup? This is kind of interesting. In 2014, there was officials in South Florida. They tried to pass a resolution proposing that South Florida and North Florida break off into two separate states. The major issue and the reason for this breakup proposal was South Miami's mayor was upset at the legislatures, the lawmakers, and the state government who are located in Tallahassee. They were not doing enough to combat global warming. And Miami is affected more than any other city, probably in the whole country, by global warming. And, they have very different views politically on how to solve problems. And Tallahassee and Miami are very different places. So, a lot of people think like Southern Florida is very much different than Northern Florida, and which is split up. The culture is different. The politics is different. Like a lot of things are different about the different parts of the state. So that leads me to my final question, um, talking about the split of the two states. But first, what are five states in the Northeast? So we talked about that in the very beginning. My next question is, should Florida be considered part of the South? Why or why not? I think that's an important question. And then you could talk about the culture. You can talk about the geography. I mean, geographically, it's definitely part of the South, but culturally, is it? Should it be considered its own unique place? And then last but not least, should Florida be split into two states? Why or why not? Okay, so that's my lesson for today. This is the last week, so I know some students are still sending some assignments that you're missing. If you have any questions, let me know. Send me an email. I probably will not have, or I don't want to say that yet, but be on the lookout on Google Classroom for more updates about things. And as always, if you have a question, let me know and send me an email. Have a good day, guys.